I want to welcome you this morning. I'm Orians, you know who I am. I'm a retired University of Washington biology professor. And I study birds a lot. And I'm going to talk for 45 minutes, as only a professor can do, to try to answer a question he knows he can't answer. Okay? But I hope in the process of trying to answer the question what it's like to be a bird, we get some really wonderful insights during the process of exploration. So I want you to join me in this exploration. And to guide our exploration, I'm going to use an important metaphor. The ecological theater and the evolutionary play. The ecological theater and the evolutionary play. So life evolves on an ecological theater. And the interesting thing is that the evolutionary play keeps changing the ecological theater. Because a very important part of the ecological theater are other organisms. And they're evolving. So this interaction of the ecological theater and the evolutionary play is a powerful metaphor, and we're going to use that. So keep it in mind. I'm really fond of metaphors. I never metaphor I didn't like. So let's follow. In order to do that, of course, I've got to make you into evolutionary biologists. So we've got to take a little bit of time to do that. It's not as hard as you think. The first thing I want to do is I hope I never hear any of you ever saying survival of the fittest. Why not? It's a horrible idea. Darwin didn't use it. It was coined by Herbert Spencer later, and it's terrible. Well, why is it so terrible? First, it's circular. How do you survive because you're fit? How do you know you're fit because you survived? You're trying to, it's circular, and you're trying to define something and by means of itself. So it doesn't work. And people who didn't like evolution grabbed onto that and said, look, this is silly. It is. But, but another reason why it's terrible is that the currency of evolution is not survival, it's genes. Okay? Survival contributes, but a lot of other things contribute to the ability to pass genes, but survival is only one of them, and often it's sacrificed. Let me just give you one example. One of the most powerful and common forms of life are annual plants. Annual plants germinate, live for a few months, produce massively, give everything into reproduction and die. Few months. Longevity? No. Very, very successful. And in fact, human life has been based upon knowing about those plants. Over half of all calories consumed by human beings today consist of 3 annual plants. Corn, wheat, and rice. Right? So our whole life, the human evolution, is tied up with annual plants who have said, to hell with living a long time. Okay? So it's very important. The currency is genes. And the way to think about evolution is just imagine we're taking a population, we're going to count all the genes, and after a generation of reproduction, we go count the genes again. And some of the genes will have increased in frequency, and some of them will have decreased in frequency, and that's what evolution is. And those that the traits that are characterized and influenced by those genes that have increased are the ones that are evolving. So just think in terms of genes. Survival is just one input into the whole business of how evolution works. So I don't ever want to walk around this halls here and hear anybody saying survival of the fittest. If you do, I'll know your apartment number. So with that, as an introduction, you are now all qualified evolutionary biologists. You know how to think about this. Let's finally talk about birds. which is, okay, you want, what is this guy going to talk about birds? So I'm going to use birds then as the focus in following this. And there's a lot of ways to sort of get started about birds. But probably the one that's most powerful, we get the most mileage out of, is that birds fly. Now there are birds that don't fly, and we'll talk a bit about them, but the vast majority of birds fly, and the evolution of flight is something that characterizes and affects everything else about birds. So for flying, weight is terribly important. The airline industry is finally figuring this out. But birds knew about this all along. And if so, you compare, this is a lamb bone, really heavy, solid. You can give this to your dog. Here's some chicken bones, really light, they're hollow. If you like your dog, you don't feed it to these because it's cricket and it makes the dog sick. So birds have really, really light bones. And a lot of other things have gone along with getting light. One of the things, interestingly, is the loss of teeth. Ancient birds all had teeth. If you look at the fossils, they all had teeth. Birds have lost teeth. So what's going on? Teeth are big and massive and heavy. And our head, the brain is only 3 pounds. An awful lot of it is full of a lot of other stuff, the big, massive jaws and the heavy teeth and all that stuff. So probably the loss of teeth and the evolution just of the use of bills, which are lightweight, is probably part of the evolution of learning, being light and flying. And bills are absolutely wonderful. You can do all sorts of things with. We won't go there right now, but you all know the incredible variety of bird bills, and they're very light. And how do birds handle some of the tough stuff? They swallow stones and a little thing we call the gizzard, and they grind stuff up in the gizzard, and that's the substitute for teeth. And so when you see birds at the hills on the roadside picking up gravel, they're eating it for a good reason. They're putting it in their gizzard. And you all eat chicken gizzard. It's really tough muscle, right? And you want to grind it up before you and put it in your stuffing before you try to eat it. So the bills have created enabled a lot of stuff. And another, of course, is one of the most remarkable evolutionary innovations are feathers. Now, birds not the first thing to get feathers. The ancestors of a lot of dinosaurs had feathers, and we now know that they had colors, and that birds weren't the first organisms to devise feathers, and the feathers of dinosaurs were not for flying. Those were not reptiles that flew, and the early birds got feathers before they flew. So feathers do a lot of different things. And these are flight feathers. But if you look at a bird, there's all the contour feathers that are all around the bird. They don't look anything like that. And moreover, when a lot of birds are born, or even later on when they incubate their eggs, they have down. They produce down feathers, which are very different structure. And that's, of course, the wonderful down that geese and ducks produce is what we originally used to fill our sleeping bags and jackets, until we found a fossil fuel substitute that was cheaper. And we don't do that anymore. But the down, when chickens and ducks are born, they have nothing but down feathers. Those are nothing but insulation. And the feathers that look something like this grow out later. If you watch a chicken, it comes out later. And so at first it's nothing but down, which leads to the little quip about the embarrassed duckling. He was born with his pants down. But also there's birds. If you want to see the variety of feathers too, go to the zoo and watch the penguins. Penguins all have feathers. They're densely feathered, but they don't use it for flying, as you know. It's body insulation, and they're very different. And those are probably much more like the feathers that the dinosaurs had. because they're not, but they provide the insulation. And feathers provide a very important thing of insulation. And as a result, birds are what we may call warm-blooded, which is a bad term, because a lot of other, what is significant about birds is the feathers allow you to control heat loss. So birds can stay warm, and it's amazing, you see a little chickadee out there with feathers and can sleep on a below freezing night, just fluff them up a little bit. Feathers are amazingly good at this sort of thing. So the important thing is that you can control heat loss. And the other group of animals that figured that out are mammals, and it's fur that can do it. But you have to, if you're in the other thing that mammals use, of course, is blubber. If you're in the cold water, you can insulate with a lot of blubber. But if you're a small marine mammal, you can't. The smallest marine mammal has the most dense fur of all, which almost contributed to its extermination. That's the sea otter. And manatees, if you've seen Florida, manatees aren't quite big enough, and they have trouble when it gets cold. And in Florida, they hang around with little places where there's a little extra heat coming off because they get chilly in the winter, and they're simply not big enough to use blubber. So, but fur and feathers are the two things that enabled these two groups of mammals to control heat loss and therefore run hot. And birds run really hot, and it's very expensive to run hot. Maintaining all this. The way to describe that, the best way, is imagine a lizard and a bird that weigh the same. And a lizard doesn't maintain, the lizard can run very hot, but it has to sit in the sun and warm up because it can't control the heat loss. So the lizards may run very hot when they're running, but they get very cold. They can't control the heat loss. And the price for that is a bird and a lizard of roughly the same weight. The bird metabolizes about 8 times the calories per day as the lizard. It's costly to run hot, and so therefore birds find ways of saving energy. And our local Anna's hummingbirds, which are non-migratory, they just go cold at night. They drop their temperature way down at night, and then they bring it back up in the morning. It saves energy. And of course, mammals are experts on this. They hibernate, and during bad times they save an enormous amount of energy. But it's really expensive to run hot. And the interesting question, why does it pay to run so hot? It's an enormous price to run hot. And also, we run hot very close to the maximum temperature that makes us really sick. The temperature doesn't have to go up very much before you really get sick. And so it's very interesting. What's the advantage of running so hot? And we'll leave that for another time, okay? But I want to talk about birds too, okay? So this is flying is a big deal. It tells us an awful lot about birds. Viewing the world, too, is another one I just want to talk about a little bit. Well, birds are operating pretty much in the same wavelengths we do. They see much the same stuff as we do. They can see some ultraviolet, but we know a camera and we can get what the world looks like, and we can help stuff that we don't get. But the most amazing thing about that I want to talk about is the evolution of how we perceive the world, is the evolution of color vision. This is just really astounding. I want to spend a little time on this because it's so wonderful. As we know, there's no color. You've got a color, but you don't have any color. It's all up here, okay? But what we know is that the sensation of color, that there are some opsin molecules that absorb light at different frequencies. And interestingly, they're the same one used by every living organism that sees light. They developed early on in evolution. Nothing better has ever come along, and all organisms use the same thing. So our color vision, we get 3 of these that have different wave spectra, we know what they are, and you combine them and the brain creates color. Strawberries aren't red because they got a lot of red molecules. There's no red molecules in strawberries. But I see the world, and you all see the world as red, and my brain tells me it's all out there. And I use it to pick up strawberries and stuff. And a botanist friend of mine who couldn't do it, we were walking up to one of these strawberry plants, and it was in full bloom with red fruits all over the place, and he walked up and he couldn't see them. So what color vision, developing that sense, enables us to get a lot more information out of the environment. Is it information enricher? And that's presumably what makes it pay, there's more information out there that I can access than if all I could do is see the world like an Ansel Adams photo. Now, even more interesting, we got 3 of these, and that gives us, birds have 4 of them. And so we have no idea what the absorption pattern, what the world looks like to birds, because we can't imagine it having 4 of them. And we'll probably never know what it looks like to a bird out there, what they're seeing. But we can be pretty sure what they're seeing out there is not very much like what we're seeing. But we'll never know what a bird sees out there. We think we know what it sees, but we don't, and we probably never will. But we get a lot out of understanding the plumage of birds and figuring it out with our vision, and we do all right in figuring out a lot of stuff, but we have to remember, what's it like to be a bird when it comes to vision? We're miles off, and as far as I can tell, we always will be. There's no way to get at that. So, but let's pause for a minute what the evolution of color vision is. Nervous systems have created something new, the sense of color. This is wavelength out there, and I'm seeing all this color. Is this an illusion? Is it real? What does it mean to be an illusion or being real? But this is really important as an indication of how evolutionary innovations start. They build on something, you add, and you get something brand new that's wonderful. And it may seem mysterious, but we can understand that one. We know why I think you're colorful. Why my brain does that to me. And I'm rather glad it does, because you look rather pretty out there. It's rather nice. But so the evolution of color vision has really important lessons. Just think about this and how it tells us something about the evolution of evolutionary novelties. And we know how this one does, but there's a lot of others we don't understand. But this is a good metaphor, model for how it is that we should think about that sort of thing. So the evolution of color vision is just an exciting thing. I want to mention, well, one other thing I should mention, we'll come back to later, about birds flying. They're hard to catch. Really hard to catch. And we'll park that, we'll come back to that, because that's a really important thing about understanding birds and how they get along in the world, the evolutionary play on this. They're hard to catch, okay? We'll come back to that. I want to next discover a topic that you all pay a lot of attention to and make a big deal of this on the television, the neat little tricks that birds can solve. You give them a problem and they solve it. And isn't that great that birds can do that? But what you get on television is remarkably uninformative. To understand what's going on, again, we have to look back at how do the birds use various techniques when they're finding food. And let me illustrate that with one example of a common little experiment that's been performed many times. You have a perch, and on a string, you dangle a very attractive item to eat down below. And in order to get it, a bird has to reach down with its bill, hold the string in its feet, do this several times and get it, okay? That's how the trick is solved. Give that problem to a crow, no problem, gets it right away. Give the problem to a chickadee, gets it right away. Give the problem to a finch that looks at it and has absolutely no idea what to do. Now, are finches dumb? In the amount of time, well, finches aren't dumb, they just don't. But let's look back. When crows, if you watch crows feed, they do a lot of incorporation of bill and foot. They think they hold it, they work on it. Crows use that combination regularly. So do chickadees. If I watch it, my feeder, a chickadee takes a sunflower seed, it goes over to a perch, holds the sunflower seed in its foot, and works and opens it up. They have the evolved machinery to solve the new problem. The finches don't use their bills and feet together, and in the tiny fraction of the time it takes the chickadee to open the sunflower, the finch with its bill and tongue husks it much, much faster. But the finches don't have the evolved genetic material to deal with that problem. So the important metaphor here is that in order to learn something new, you have to have some genetically programmed play behavior that you can use and build on. And so the notion of, is it genetic or is it learned? It's just not a useful way to look at things. Everything is some combination, because you can't learn anything until you got the genes that enable you to do it. So these evolve together. And the species that has by far the most genes involved in helping it learn is us. To learn what we can do, we got tons of genes involved to help us do it, without which we couldn't learn a language the way we do. More about that some other time. So anyway, I want you, the purpose of this little example is, one, just don't get sucked in on the neat things they can do. Try to look beyond this and try to understand this from an evolutionary point of view, and then we get a much better insight into why they have certain abilities may or may not evolve. And this, the neat little thing, it's just solved this trick. It may be fun to watch, but you don't get that much insight out of it. Okay, so that's, a lot of those are on television. Isn't it cool they evolved it, we're able to solve the problem. But until we use an evolutionary perspective, we miss out on what's really. So I'm trying to make you into wonderful Darwinian creatures. To understand this stuff, you have to think in evolutionary terms. Nothing in biology makes sense without evolution. And without employing it, I'll give you some more examples as we go along, you don't get it. And so that's the lesson from that. So let me move on to a very important thing that is characteristic of birds is parental care. Okay, and birds and mammals in particular evolved extensive parental care, and in birds and mammals it's totally different. The main reason is that other than laying eggs, male birds can do everything the female birds do, and in an awful lot of bird reproductive system, males and females do the same stuff. Male mammals don't make milk. So I got those nipples up here, and they're kind of useless. But you know, they're the legacy of the evolution. But in mammals, the parental care is entirely female. And there's almost no mammals in which males contribute to parental care. It's really rare. And if you watch, you see the female leopard, she's got her cubs around, but there's no male around. The lion's the male around, but he's just roaring and defending stuff. But if you look at all the mammals, you see that it's the females with the kids. There's no males around there. Males don't. The only mammals in which the males do much of anything are carnivores, like lions or foxes, or wild dogs are the males, can hunt and bring back stuff and regurgitate and feed the kids. For herbivorous mammals, which is most of them, what can the male do? Nothing. Nothing. So, but birds are overwhelmingly monogamous, biparental care. Mammals are almost never monogamous and almost never have biparental care. An interesting exception is one in which the juvenile period is extraordinarily extended and the longest we know, in which there is substantial male parental care, and that's again us. We're really unusual. We have elaborate parental care, and males are important contributors. Although they often try to do a little thing and get rid of it. We had all sorts of laws to prevent that. No, you got to pay up, guy. You know. So anyway, birds and mammals are so different, and that's related to the fact that what the nature of parental care is. So that's just useful why birds and mammals are just so different. But let's go back a little bit more to understand the evolution of parental care. And in order to do that, I have to tell you what sex is. I'm serious. You think you know, but let me give it a try. What the difference between sex and reproduction are opposite stuff. Sex is the combination of genetic material from two or more individuals into one. Reproduction is the generation of new individuals. They're quite the opposite. To see this so clearly, I'll go back to the days when you took Biology 1, and you may have looked at under a microscope a little paramecium swirling around there. They got big enough that you can see, and you can see the chromosomes in there. And every once in a while, paramecia get together, and they have sex. We were sort of delicate about it. We called it conjugation, but it's sex, okay? They share genes, and they split. Two came together, two leave. No new individuals, sex. And later on, the paramecium reproduces, and it multiplies by dividing, which is rather cool. And so you get new individuals. So sex and reproduction are very, very different things. So why do we get them all conflated? It's because the only time during the life cycle of a multicellular organism that you can do that is the one-cell stage in the life cycle. Otherwise you can't do it. And so we do it when it happens when the sex is happening, when the reproduction is happening. They all happen at the same time, because the only time it can happen is the single-cell stage in the life cycle. And this is true for all multicellular complicated organisms. Sex has to occur at the stage of the life cycle when you're down to one cell. So that means why we think it's the same thing, and it's not. So, but let's follow that out a little bit and go down. When we look at this, we find an amazing pattern. And that is that we look at what's going on, we find that the sexes are virtually always two. There's only two, which is an interesting. But also, there's a certain pattern to them. One is that there's one group of individuals. Well, let me just back up slightly. We're producing the sex cells, the gametes, as we call them. In order to do that, you go through the special cell division where, we're all diploid, we got a set of chromosomes these got from mom and pop, and the sex cells are haploid. We're down two divisions of the cell and only one duplication, so they're haploid, and when they come back together, we're back to the same diploid number, okay? And that's interesting, long evolved, but let's look at, if we look at all across the living world, it turns out that there are two kinds. One kind produces smaller gametes, these sex cells, that have more energy, which means they cannot produce as many of them. And individuals that do that, we call female. That's the definition of a female. And then the other kind are producing gametes that have almost no energy, that are motile, and what they do is spend a lot of time trying to find a female. So what this means that in evolution, there are always a lot of male gametes chasing a few eggs. And it's the same with plants. In plants we call it pollen and ova, but it's the same thing. There's a lot of the male gametes chasing a small number of female gametes. And this pattern has profound implications for the structure of life. And I just want to read you a small poem by Aldous Huxley, which, and poetry is so good at capturing a lot with a very few words, and this is a lovely poem. It's called The Fifth Philosopher's Song, and it goes like this. A million spermatozoa, all of them alive, out of their cacophony, but one poor Noah dare hope to survive. Among that billion minus one, it could have been to be Shakespeare, another Newton, a new Don, but the one was me. Shame on you, they've ousted your betters, well, thus taking the ark, okay, while others remained outside. Better for all of us, froward homunculus, if you'd quickly died. Well, there's a lot of that poem, really. I really like that poem. So basically what we have then is lots of the male gametes chasing female gametes, a few female gametes, and that's captured there. And that's what drives what we often regard as male behavior is different from female behavior. It all derives from that. But what happens to change it a lot is parental care. Because whereas you can produce massive numbers of gametes and hope to find a lot of eggs, you can only take care of a few kids. So when you're involving biparental care, this changes stuff a lot. It doesn't change it as much in mammals because it's not biparental, but in birds it overwhelmingly is. So what do we see? How does this influence what we see in birds? Well, for most birds, you have to have both of them partners doing it and taking care. If one partner dies or deserts, the babies die. The eggs, and so what we see so much of is pair affirmation. They get together, they dance and do this stuff because it's very important to ascertain that the partner is still in, because if the partner leaves, and boy do we do that as human beings. Try to go 2 days without saying to your partner, I love you. Catastrophe unfolds. We are looking for affirmation because it's so important. If somebody defaults, the consequences are severe. So a lot of the dancing and stuff you see in monogamous birds, you can see as pair affirmation. They're getting together and strengthening the bond because we both got to be into this. Because in most birds, like the birds like our gulls out here, or the herons or the big birds, everybody knows where the nest is. All the predators know where the nest is, right? Out here now, the crows know where every gull nest is going to be, and they're watching it. And you can't leave it alone until the babies are big enough to fight off a crow. Until then, somebody's got to be there all the time. And so, and this is true of an awful lot of stuff, that if you lose one partner, it falls. The other partner simply can't do it alone. So in a lot of monogamous birds, which are most birds, you have to, what has evolved is this pair affirmation. You know, it's an assurance. You're still in the game, right? We put it in those terms. But what happens, a lot of birds, most birds are monogamous and by parental care. Some are not. What's with it? This with the ones that are not. And this is where your television is interesting. You get the mannequin dances you've seen going all around, or the birds of paradise, massive stuff. That's all males doing it, what's going on. And the males are not going to contribute anything. The females that come and pick males are getting genes and nothing more. How does that work? Well, and what you get on television is no discussion of that, because in order to discuss that and know what it's about, you have to talk about evolution. And I'm a guy, over most of my professional life, less than half of the American population has believed in my discipline. And now there's a great news, just a couple of years ago, 51% of Americans now believe in evolution. And that's a great thing, 51%. So why do you leave that out? Why do they not discuss it? Because I think it's taboo. If you're talking about the evolution of this, you're going to alienate half the population of people. So they don't ever discuss it. And so you don't have any idea what's going on. And I will try to explain to you in evolutionary, ecological theater and the evolutionary play why birds of paradise have evolved this unbelievable stuff. And nobody else has done anything quite like it. Why? I'm about to tell you, okay? At least I will try to tell you. First, all the birds that are doing that, fancy stuff, mannequin, are fruit eating. They're frugivorous birds. Most birds are not just fruit eating, but during the breeding season, they're all eating fruit, males and females. What does this mean? It means that if the male's got to be on this playground all the time and doing it over and over again, how does he stay active and alert? He's got to go off and feed. And if it's fruit, you get it really fast. If you've got to go hunting insects or mice, a lot longer time. And the same is true with the mannequins. They're fruit eaters in the understory of tropical forests. So these also means that the female, which is doing it all alone, can raise babies all by herself, because when she goes off to feed herself, she's really fast, and so she can get other stuff and start feeding other stuff to the babies and bring it off. So it has evolved in frugivorous birds because that is permissive. It allows the females can do it all alone, and so they spend all the time picking the males, and so when they come into these display grounds, all they're getting is genes. And so well, let's put this guy through it, you know. And that's what happens. And you look at the bizarre things that you've all seen, what the male birds of paradise go through. And the female sister, and what you get in the television things, oh, little cutesy stuff, oh, she's not satisfied, he's got to try a bit more. All anthropomorphic. It's really sick to watch it, because that's not what's going on. But the selection is entirely and it can be driven to extremes. Now, why could it go to extremes in New Guinea or in the forest understory nowhere else? Well, New Guinea, here's the ecological theater. New Guinea has no arboreal fruit-eating mammals. There's no monkeys. The only there's a couple leaf-eating possums, and the kangaroo that's up in the tree that is also eating leaves kind of looks like, I don't really understand what I'm doing up here. It really looks very inept. If you got monkeys into New Guinea, the tree kangaroos would be dead very, very quickly. But monkeys or apes, but so in New Guinea, the birds of paradise and bowerbirds have the fruits all to themselves. So it's easy to go off and get it. You're not competing with monkeys. But also, if you're driving this elaborate stuff, not only do you attracting the females know where the guy is, so does everybody else know where they are, who might want to eat you rather than mate with you. So New Guinea is also different in terms of the array of predators. It's got, for some reason, marsupials have been the way of life is very poor at really generating effective predators. And the marsupial, we had a little marsupial wolf, which was pretty sad as being a wolf and it wants to stink right away. And Tasmanian devils or something like this are just angry little clumsy things. Even though there are marsupials there, marsupials were very, very poor at making effective predators. So there are no mammalian predators that are in New Guinea to make it hard, because there's counter selection. If you drive something extreme and doing all of that, you're attracting things you don't want to attract that are going to eat you rather than mate with you. And we know this is a problem because I can watch the robins down, I go down on D-level things, and the male robin is singing away. And I know exactly when he gets a female, because the rate of singing drops 90%. He still says hello, but you're up there singing and letting everybody know, well, and letting all the hawks know too. And so you drop it. So there's counter selection always that prevents you from going. The thing about New Guinea is the counter selection is really weak, so you can drive it to extremes. So that's how the ecological theater in New Guinea leads to a very different evolutionary play. So I hope during this little excursion that I've tried to lead you in, that you see the power of evolutionary thinking, and you see the power of the metaphor, the ecological theater, and the evolutionary play. And by following that, even though, as I told you at the beginning, I don't know what it's like to be a bird, I think we've learned a lot in the process of really why birds have evolved to the thing they be what they are, and a fringe benefit on the side. We've gotten some new insights, I think, on the enigma of the strangest and most powerful thing of all. What's it like to be a human being? Thank you. And I'm going to beg your condolences here that I sit down during the Q&A. And questions. So,
if you choose to answer this, I was curious about how bird flu. I wanted to ask about how bird flu progresses. How do we get bird flu?
Well, that's very, very interesting. Because we don't really know, because birds evolve feathers before they evolve flight. And there's competing theories. One is from the ground up, they use feathers to help climb. The other is from up above, which is from gliding to flapping. We may never know. There's just a lot of speculation about that. But we don't know. And that's awfully hard to figure out. Because how do you, it's one of those things that it happened a long time ago, and it doesn't leave any traces, and it's hard to know. Well, so they're still arguing about it. Was it ground up or glide down? We don't know. And I don't expect the answer soon.
You have another mic. Did you have the mic?
Right here.
Here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Certain songbirds at the feeder in our yard will unbelievably hover like a hummingbird. And some seem to try it and they can't do it. Do you have any idea what that is going on there?
Well, by being able to hover, you can get access to stuff that you can't get access to otherwise. If you watch hummingbirds, not only do they hover in front of flowers, but hummingbirds eat a lot of insects. Sugar water is good for powering muscles. You don't build muscles on sugar water. And so hummingbirds have to eat a lot of insects. And you can see them going around plants that there's no flowers, there's no pollen. They're from the outside hovering and getting this. So hovering enables you to get access to stuff that's hard to get at if you can't hover. And so hummingbirds have become, the superb hoverers. And so that's probably what's involved. Hovering enables you to get at something you can't get. The problem is the rest of the birds are really clumsy hoverers. They're not very good at it.
They try.
They try, and they pay out, but it's the superb hoverers that are able to get access to this other stuff.
We have, I'm sorry, Rabbit, as usual, some mic problems.
It's hard for me to see sitting down, so.
I know, I'm sorry.
Can you come get it, Sam? Sam's gonna come and get it.
But I see hands way over to the left. I think they're associated with the body.
Small question. How do you spell gamete?
Okay, the question is, how do you spell gamete? It's G-A-M-E-T-E, and that's the name we apply to the sex cells, the pollen, ova in plants, sperm and eggs in animals. And so the name of, and that's useful to have the word gamete, because that applies to a particular kind of cell. And so we scientists like to develop a lot of names for stuff, but this is a really genuinely useful name.
Is it from the Greek?
I don't know where Greek, where it comes from. It could well be Greek. The sources of scientific names are both Latin and Greek we draw upon. The bird I studied a lot, the yellow-headed blackbird, is xanthocephalus, yellow-headed yellowhead. That's Greek. That's not Latin. No, but gamete is a very useful term, and they're all haploid. We're all diploid, got 2 sets of chromosomes. They're all haploid.
What's that mean?
I mean, they only got 1 set of chromosomes. They have half the number of chromosomes, and when they combine with the gamete of the opposite sex, you're back up to diploid. And we're all diploid and enjoy it. But if you didn't have that reduction, each generation the number of chromosomes would double. Now that does not explain how it happened, but that would be the consequences of not having it. Over here.
Oh, I thought Sam was next.
Gordon?
Oh, okay. Can you tell me about the behavior of the cassowary? My understanding is that once she lays the eggs, it's hasta la vista.
Well, okay, the cassowary, which is one of the few these huge, large, non-flying birds. Australia has the emu and the cassowary. Africa has the ostrich, and South America has the emus. And all of these are birds in which, in fact, I think it's true of all of them, is that multiple females contribute to the same nest. And one of the ways of having a lot, because birds with that size will produce about 1 egg every 2 days. So most of the songbirds, it's 1 egg a day. And so an incubation begins when the clutch is complete. Otherwise, everybody will be hatching at very different sizes, so they don't start incubating. But in these dangerous places where you're nesting on the ground, and ostriches pull it off in an environment that's got the most formidable array of predators anywhere on Earth. How do ostriches make it? Well, one of the ways you have an extremely powerful egg. You can feed your dog an ostrich egg bone. Okay, no problem. And a person I know once saw an ostrich kill a lion by jumping on its back and kicking it, and he broke its back. But what if you have multiple females contributing? You assemble the clutch faster.
But then the male is left caring for it.
Well, then the male, the females are off producing eggs for different nests. And the male then, which is bigger, sits down and does the incubating and fights off the lions or whatever else. But that procedure is probably adaptive because it shortens the time to assemble a clutch. Because multiple females, you get it fast, so that reduces that time of vulnerability. So that's probably what's going on there. And these are great big things nesting on the ground. Those eggs are very, very attractive. If we were making ostrich egg omelet, wow, you know. So this is probably why that unusual thing developed. And it's all of those big ones. It's true of ostriches, it's true of cassowaries and emus. It's not a unique thing, and it's probably, that's what's going on.
Over here.
Okay, Sam.
One of the most intriguing experiences I've had was giving a ride to the ranger on the Monteverde Cloud Forest in Monteverde, and which is a very perilous road from sea level up there. And in appreciation for the ride, he asked us to come and meet him the next morning, and he would take us to see the Quetzal, I don't know.
Quetzal?
Yeah, the traditional beautiful bird.
Yeah, Quetzal.
And I said, oh, that's wonderful. How, will we be able to find him? And he looked at me like, I thought you were a smart guy. He said, oh, it's always in the same place.
Yeah.
And then he went on to expand that birds, well, we associate birds with freedom. They can fly anywhere. In fact, they don't. They fly in their, however it happens, in a zone that's highly predictable to ornithologists. And the same reasoning, he said, or the same issue, applied to birds that do large-scale migrations. They always go back and forth to the same place. So they have this complex GPS in the sense of what it can do, but it seems to be much more limited when you get to learn about it. And I wondered if that was so. Was he saying things that were objectively verifiable, that birds are not as free as we think they are, they always hover in the same place, and that their annual flights, those that make them, are to the same places back and forth?
That's partly true. A lot of birds don't come back. Well, one of the things that with having flight enables birds to tack onto massive increases of resources in various parts of the world. And the most profound example of this is the spring migration of birds in the northern hemisphere. That millions of them go forward. And where are they going? Mostly up to the boreal forest, which stretches from Alaska across Canada across Siberia. It has short summers but very warm, all sorts of productivity and activity. Okay, the moose fatten up a bit and have one baby. Mammals just can't do that. And so the birds take it. The same is the way of the Arctic tundra. But there's a lot of birds that just depend upon the lemmings up there. And where are the lemmings this year? And there's something like the Jaegers and snowy owls go all over the place looking where
But does that mean they remember for the next year where to go from memory?
Well, a lot of birds do remember, yes, and a lot of birds do return to the same place because there's advantages to returning to the place you already know. You're probably going to be more effective in exploiting an environment that you already know. So that's probably, so it varies. There are advantages in going back to the same place. There are advantages in not to. And it also depends to how limited the nest sites are. And let's give you one example here. Birds that catch their prey on the wing, forage that way, like hummingbirds, swallows, swifts. They have the prey. They don't defend any territory because you don't know where the prey is going to be. The wind blows this way and they're over, and the wind blows that way and they're over there. So you're going to have to travel long distances, and there's all sorts of premium on being lightweight. And I showed, well, they carry this lightweightness even further. They've reduced the legs so much that they can't walk. If you watch swallows on a wire, they can't walk. They can just perch. If you watch a hummingbird perch, it can't move. Its legs are tiny. And the worst case, or the most extreme case, are swifts, which are the most extreme. And their legs are so weak they can't even perch. And they shuffle along. So, those of you that have a more prurient mind may be asking, how do they do it? Well, they do it in the air. The female sits, the male lands on her back and flutters and gets the cloaca under for the kiss. He can't hop on her. And this is a remarkable, well, it's in the air. And and that's the only birds that do that as far as I know. But that was the stimulus for one of the most effective advertising campaigns in an American airlines. Fly United.
Gordon,
Okay, over here.
a long time ago, you were asked about bird flu, and I don't think the question was about flight, but about the disease, bird flu disease, and why are we all concerned about the transfer of organisms from birds to us, virus. Do I have that right?
Birds flu,
Bird flu is a disease, viral disease,
He's talking
right?
about how organisms jumped from animals to humans as COVID did.
Oh, you're talking about the transfer of diseases?
Yeah, avian flu.
Oh, well, it's interesting, the patterns. Well, the evolution of these viruses lets us know that despite what you hear, mutations are not random, but they are random with respect to the need that the organism has. This is very important. The way they design the vaccines, they know something about the patterns of the mutations of the viruses and try to guess a year in advance, and some years they guess better than others. So, but we can, if we look, what are the diseases that are likely to be coming from that get transferred? And it looks like from birds and mammals, which are where it's close to us. It's interesting that in human cuisines, all of the prohibitions are about animal food. Nothing about vegetables. Because it's that gets you sick. If you eat a rotting vegetable, you may get a tummy ache, but you're not going to get a disease. It's too different, it won't transfer. So there are patterns here as to whether you can make it or not. And I think, the fact that all the prohibitions in human diets are related to animals, that's where you can get a disease if you're not careful. You can't get a disease from eating bad apples. They may not taste good, you may get a tummy ache, but you're not going to pick up a disease, and it'll be over tomorrow morning, you know.
Gordon, I have two questions. One, when a bird eats a piece of gravel, why does it stick in the gizzard and doesn't pass all the way through? And secondly, we lived in Arizona, and the mourning doves always laid 2 eggs, and the quail always laid clutches of 15 to 20 eggs. Why is that?
Okay, well, I can't answer the first question, okay, so we'll pass on that. But go back to pigeons. The pigeons are among the birds that probably survived the big meteor crash 66 million years ago, because they're totally independent of insects or anything like that. And the way pigeons feed their babies is they have a crop that manufactures what we call pigeon milk. And what you see, if you watch the domestic pigeons, when they come up to feed the babies, there's nothing, and the babies stick one bill on each side of the mouth, and they pump up this pigeon milk. And so pigeons nowhere lay more than 2 eggs, anywhere. And some of the tropical big fruiting pigeons lay only 1, but it's never more than 1 to 2, and it's related to the nutrition. Now the quail is an interesting situation with respect to reproduction. That way birds can be seen to fall into 2 major groups, which we will call altricial and precocial. And precocial is used very much in scientifically the way we'd use it in common parlance. They're born fully able to run around. So when the chicken hatches, and it gets itself out of the egg, birds don't help anybody hatch. And so the chicken, when it dries off, can run around and find its own food. It doesn't have to be fed. The only thing the adult does is help it go to some place where it is good. The adults don't feed it. And so when you have that, parental care after hatching can be extended to a larger number of babies. And that's true of the ostriches and cassowaries, that once they hatch, you don't have to feed them. So the altricial birds, like the songbirds, they're hatch out and they're helpless, and all they can do is put their mouth up and it takes a long time to feed them, up to the point when they can. So precocial birds, as you might expect, all nest on the ground, because you don't have to use flying, or over the water. So like ducks, geese, sandpipers, you know. Altricial birds, most of them nest up above the ground, and the first flight had better be a good one. So that made it this. Well, and this one, I should have mentioned, there's one example of birds that have no parental care after hatching, only one. And these are the birds that are called megapodes or mound builders. The Australians call them brush turkeys, but they're not turkeys. These are really unusual birds, and there's nothing else like them. And they build a great big mound of rotting material, and they lay the eggs in the mound. And the eggs are incubated by the heat generated by the rotting stuff. And they do come back and test, put the bill in and see what the temperature is, and add a little bit or lose to keep it there. But when the young megapode hatches out, there's no parents around, it never sees an adult. And that's the only case I know of birds that have no parental care after the egg hatches. And it's a very interesting question. How does a megapode know it's a megapode?
Gordon, there was a reason why I grabbed the microphone to carry it around. I'm way in the back, it's Madge.
Oh, okay.
Because I wanted to ask a question. It is, birds use their feathers to keep warm in cold weather, but why don't their legs and feet freeze?
Very good question. You've seen the ducks, and the fact is they do. If you look at a bird's leg, there's no bones, there's no muscles there, right? It's all tendons. And the muscles that control the legs are back up in the feathers where it's warm. And so there's no muscles down there, so they do let them get pretty cold. But also birds have a counter current system that the blood, warm blood going out goes alongside the cold blood coming in. And so it does some heat transfer. But birds, basically the answer to your question is birds get cold feet.
If I heard you correctly, only 51% of Americans believe in evolution.
It's right now, the latest result is 51%.
Is it related to the political party, but I won't get into that.
I don't know. Wait, I'm a biologist, who lives most of his adult life living in a country where the bulk of the population doesn't believe in your profession. It's sort of odd. But nobody asks me, you believe in genetics? Do you believe in viruses? People do. You've never seen one, have you? But somehow the whole concept of evolution is really hard to understand. We're grappling with it, and I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. but it's it's lonely being an evolutionary biologist in a sense,
Gordon, this has been wonderfully informative.
Yes.
Thank you so much.